Welcome, and thank you for attending tonight's panel discussion entitled Portland's 2010 Charter Commission, a look back for lessons learned. The event is sponsored by the Portland Public Library and the League of Women Voters of the Portland area. Our panelists tonight are 4 distinguished members of the 2010 Commission, whose major recommendations in effect created the structure of local government we have today. As we know, on June 8th, Portland voters will elect 9 members of the 2021 Charter Commission to join 3 members who've already been appointed by the City Council. Over the next 12 months, the new commission will recommend changes to the current charter or not. Then these recommendations will be put before the voters for approval or disapproval. As audience members, if you have questions, please enter them either in the Q&A or the chat boxes on your screen. The 2010 Charter Commission enjoyed a reputation of working collaboratively to consider the major changes of the day. After 10 years to put their recommendations to the test, we've asked 4 of them to come back and join us tonight to reflect on their handiwork and to see how they feel about the decisions they made. Joining us tonight are Pam Plum, who was chair of the 2010 Commission and a former city councilor and mayor, Jim Cohen, vice chair of the 2010 Commission, also a former councilor and mayor and current president of the Portland Chamber of Commerce, and Trevor Rowe, an at-large member of the 2010 Commission and currently a Portland School Board member, and Lori Davis, District 3 member of the 2010 Commission and a former school board member. And as moderator, Michael Cabetti, who is one of the appointed members of the 2021 Charter Commission. Michael, take it away.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you to the Portland Public Library, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for making this event possible. And thank you to these distinguished former charter commissioners, our founding parents or refounding parents, for taking time away from such a beautiful spring evening to share some of the arcane details of, as Anne said, their handiwork. I'll tell the audience that unfortunately Jim Cohen won't be able to be with us throughout the entire process, so I will let him speak a little more than the other panelists in the first part of this conversation. But I'll get us started with a general question. So you all, along with your other charter commissioners, met over 24 times for meetings that ran 3 or more hours, as far as I've heard, and made some important changes to the city charter. Would you mind sharing what the major recommendations of the 2010 Commission were and why you made those major recommendations?
Sure. Do you care where we start?
I don't care where you start, and I don't care who starts. Pam, as the chair, perhaps you should take it away.
I'll give a shot at it, but I think each person will have his or her own point of view. There were 4 results, and those are pretty easy to say quickly. One was to take a council position and make it a popularly elected, citywide, full-time, paid mayor, with the expectation that that person would spend their full time being out and about in the city, understanding what was going on, working with the council to have the council make decisions that would lead the city in the direction it needed to go. Then there was the ranked choice voting, and ranked choice voting turned out to be a significant and lasting change, not only in Portland, but around this state overall. The third was a new title for what was then called the school committee, and renaming that to the Board of Public Education, giving it a little more weight and gravitas. And the fourth was more of a detail piece where when there was a recall vote for a district councilor, that would be voted upon only by members from the district. And that's the list I have. It may or may not be complete.
Vice Chair, would you like to fill in some details?
Sure, thank you, and pleasure to be here, and apologies to our audience that I will have to leave early for another meeting. but I agree entirely with what Pam had to say. Pleasure serving on the Charter Commission. And I will say this, when I joined the Charter Commission, it was a much quieter time in the city of Portland. The Charter Commission, the impetus behind it was whether or not we should have an elected mayor. That was the primary issue for myself. I had lived through several failed efforts in the city to reestablish the elected mayor position. I'm now the chair of the Portland Chamber of Commerce, but at the time I was on the city council and participated in a task force that the chamber put together that benchmarked cities around the country, and they were our peer cities, and we wanted to understand better what were they doing that was successful, and how could we better move forward? How could we have vision? How could we have leadership? So I think that was a lot of what many of us joined the Charter Commission focused on, is how can we make our city a better place, a more inclusive place? And as we arrived at the Charter Commission, I think we were all open-minded. We did a lot of study, and I really thank Pam Plum, who in her daytime job is a professional facilitator, for really helping us to move through that process in a very efficient way. And we worked hard, we learned a lot, and I think we ended up with a system of government that was better. But I've always said that good government, we can only come up with a system that's as good as the people who serve in it. And it's still important to elect good people to city government. So I do have some thoughts about some recommendations I would make, but I don't want to preempt others. But if appropriate, I could share a few thoughts before I sign off, but I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I want to give Lori and Anna a chance to weigh in if they have any details to fill in.
Well, I think one of the things that we added was a preamble that really set out, when you talk about vision, the charter just dove in, as I remember, to the nuts and bolts. And we developed a couple of short paragraphs that talked about the purpose of government and why there was a charter and sort of why we were there. And we talked equally about sort of the streets and sewers, the city side and the school side. And I know that for me, one of the important things that we did was we brought those two parts of city government. We were trying to have them really work together. I'd worked for the city and I'd worked for the school department, and I'd seen sort of both sides at times become adversarial, not agree, not understand. And so we tried in the structure to really think about ways in which we could create a structure that would help the people in the positions to work together. So the requirement for the finance committees to meet jointly, that had been happening, but we put it in so that it had to happen. And some of the other things that sort of elevated the school committee, from the school committee to the Board of Public Education, and then talked about why education was important to our city.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I think the major points that I had jotted down have been covered, but when we first began, I think really the one thing that we felt we had kind of a mandate to discuss, that was the reason that the commission had formed and been formed by the voters, was to take up the issue of the elected mayor. And so I think that was kind of like the one thing we knew we were going to get into going into it. Mm-hmm. And the feeling, I remember early on having discussions about how there were just a lot of projects that the city tried to take on that got kind of shelved. And the idea was that, maybe we needed a political leader to kind of move the ball in the right direction. So that was to me sort of the motivating factor behind the discussion around the mayor at the time. But the city and school relationship was also a key issue, because structurally in the charter, they're the same, right? So there's 9 members on each side, 5 at large, or 5 district, 4 at large. They're elected the same way. But they didn't function in sort of an equal capacity always. The other major change we made was to put the school board pay on par or in parity with the city council, and the mandated 2 joint finance committee meetings were part of trying to get the city and schools to kind of work together collaboratively during the budget process. So that and ranked choice voting, which I think once we learned about it and educated everybody about what it actually was, it became sort of an imperative part of the mayoral election, because the idea was that we wanted the mayor to be elected with a majority. And we knew that it would probably be a competitive, a sought after seat. And so we wanted the sort of mandate of the public behind that.
Great.
Remember how many candidates there were the first time? 15.
Oh, wow.
15. Ranked choice voting was a very good idea.
Yes.
Well, I think we have more than that number running for the 9 charter seats that'll be elected in a month. Jim, you had a few things to add and you have to leave soon. So I want to give you the stage. And if you are inclined, would you mind explaining what the status quo was when you became charter commissioner and how you changed it, especially as it pertains to the mayor, the most controversial issue and the reason for the convening of the charter commission?
No, thanks. It's a great question. And I mean, interestingly, just for myself, I grew up in Portland. I sort of the sort of traditional Maine mindset, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think there were a lot of Portlanders who felt that way. And so every time there was a vote to have an elected mayor, it didn't succeed. And when I joined the city council, I wasn't looking to have an elected mayor. In fact, when I ran for re-election, the primary issue that occurred in my campaign was, should Portland have an elected mayor? And I thought, it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so I wasn't in support of it. Well, I got reelected. I became mayor for my 1-year term, and I had a lot of things that I wanted to accomplish for the city. A number of those things occurred, but it was clear in 1 year, it was very difficult to accomplish that. And I was fortunate that the mayors that followed me in service allowed me to finish up my agenda before I decided not to seek re-election. But in the course of that, I felt there was something missing. There was that connection with the voters and the ability to lead. That with a 1-year rotation, it was very difficult to maintain any kind of momentum. So when I joined the Charter Commission, I was leaning in favor of having an elected mayor. In fact, I think I cast the deciding vote on the council. It was a 5-4 vote to even have a vote for a Charter Commission. So after a year of work, I think we learned that having what we call a policy mayor was the predominant form of government for cities like ours around the country, meaning that it was a mayor with policy authority, but not executive authority. But we wanted to make that mayor as strong as possible. So we researched budget vetoes. Should they have a vote on the council or not a vote on the council? Should they propose a budget? Could they direct the manager? Appointment authority. We looked at all of those things and we tried to add as much as we could. In hindsight, there are things I wish that we had done differently, and I think this new Charter Commission has an opportunity to do some of those things differently. I would say top on my list is the ability to gather information from city staff. I think at the time we wanted to limit the ability of councilors to work with city staff. But I think a consequence of that is if we want our mayor to propose a budget, if we want councilors to propose policy, they need support. We had that previously, and I feel that that's been lost. And I think it would give the council much more ability to move ahead if it had that authority. I've since heard that there are issues around the ability to review the city manager. I think that's a function of it's the most important thing that the council does is hire a manager. I think putting more authority back in the council is important. We came up with a provision about implementing, that the mayor should direct the manager in implementing policy. I don't think that provision has worked very well and needs some work. We should consider whether we should have the mayor have more authority over appointing council committees. Right now, whatever the mayor proposes can be vetoed by the rest of the council. In Augusta, our Speaker of the House doesn't have to get approval from anyone else to appoint a committee. So it's something to think about. So I think there's a number of changes that really need to be considered to make our city more functional, more responsive. And I certainly look forward to participating in the process and being an ear for folks to talk to. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight, and regretfully, I will have to jump off in a minute, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that overview, Jim. I want to ask the other charter commissioners a more general question. When a charter commission is created, the entire document is up for grabs, and you can do it a lot. How did you decide to focus on these four things rather, and not other things?
I think the public pretty well sent us in to discuss the mayor's issues. So I think that one was inevitably on the table. Some of the other things came up through general discussion and then became serious issues because the group as a whole felt they rose to that level. And that was the kind of process that we went through. And, you know, some other things were brought up, but that never generated enough collective support to move forward.
And in my memory, we spent time talking about what issues would we consider and came up with a 7-5. It had to have 7 votes to move ahead. And there were some things that as Pam said, sort of rose to that level of importance. And there were other things that were very close, but didn't actually make it to that point, but that we discussed in public in depth. And then had other paths forward. The resident non-citizen voting would be one. And I think it was the 5 of us who supported it, wrote a minority report that's in there. And there are a couple of minority reports because we certainly had differing opinions on differing issues. And one of the things I would say too is that you could agree vehemently with a whole group of people on one issue, and it was perfectly okay to be not in agreement on another issue. That it wasn't this group against that group, but where did we fall on an issue, and a lot of learning in that process, where people went in thinking, oh, I think I'm here, or I think I'm there, or I don't know where I am. And in the process, literally, sometimes on camera, change their minds. I think it was Nate Smith who said, oh, I get this now. I mean, it literally was like an aha moment on camera, changing from a pretty strongly held position to another position based on discussions that we as charter commissioners had. So that process, I think, really yielded a stronger document because we worked it over in front of the public and we talked about it in depth.
I would say the process, there's a big difference when you're running for this office and then when you get in there, because all of a sudden you only have a year to do the work and you've probably developed some ideas in addition to, the mayor that you want to kind of put on the table. And I think Pam was really instrumental in helping us get through that, because at the beginning it felt very overwhelming, like we might not make it, and what I remember that we had an early meeting where we all kind of sat around the table and put up a whiteboard, and we said, okay, what are the issues that each of us wants to bring to the table? And we went around and we put them on the table. And through the course of that conversation, we were able to kind of take some of them off the list. And then what remained, Pam appointed subcommittees just to figure out a process for each issue. So, I served on the subcommittee for non-citizen voting, and we decided that, there were basically 3 speakers that we felt we needed to bring into the commission to kind of educate the commission on the issue, to be able to deliberate. And so we kind of outlined the process, and then Pam was able to figure out how that played out on our agenda over time. And, by the skin of our neck, we made it.
I do think process is very important. Now, understand, I'm not unbiased on the subject. I'm a professional process, or was a professional process person. We had 2 professional facilitators actually on the committee. Naomi also was a professional facilitator. And I think that is something for people to look at going forward in this new round, is that process matters, and having everybody have a chance to get his or her ideas out there, to have a process where people listen and take in that information in a congenial way. All of that, I think, made a difference. And we were quite the varied group. If you would think about the actual political stances from one corner to the other corner of the room, we were quite a different group, and we were different ages, and we were, there were a lot of different pieces there, but everybody got his or her oar in and made their points and argued for what they thought was appropriate. And all I'm saying is process matters. And I wish that for the upcoming group.
So let me drill down on process then, because that's something people who are watching and I are certainly very, very curious about. How did you make decisions? Was it simple majority? Was it consensus based? And how did you decide that that was the process?
Well, someone may have to help me a little on the details of that, but it seemed to me that one, we were very careful to make sure everybody was heard and had a chance to argue, and people had a chance to argue back, and so things were explored. Secondly, we actually did a lot of research with some help from, I think, the lawyer's office at the City Hall. But we researched a lot of things, and I think that it did not require 100% consensus. That was not a requirement of the group, and the outcome was not 100%. But the process that led ultimately to the votes was pretty open, and allowed everyone to really speak his or her piece. Plus, in the facilitation part, we kept, extensive notes. I understand that the age of flip charts has come and gone, but it allowed everyone to see what was being put up at the same time, and then allowed for notes to be taken. So I'm just arguing for very good process.
Sure.
We did vote on our process early in one of the early meetings. We did the sort of kind of housekeeping stuff. We elected our chair and co-chair, or vice chair rather. And then we decided on our process, which I think we used Robert's rules generally, but not, it wasn't super formal. Like sometimes we would discuss an issue without a formal motion, for instance. But we did decide that something needed 7 votes to prevail because it couldn't pass with only 6 out of 12. So
simple majority then.
Right. Yeah.
But a very inclusive discussion process.
I think we realized that the diversity on the group was really an asset and a strength, because ultimately our recommendation was going to go out to the voters. and the voters are diverse. And we were trying to create something that we not only thought would work, but that the voters would approve. We wanted to present recommendations that we thought had, were well researched, well thought out, and that were likely to pass. We didn't want to spend a year and then get voted down. So we listened very carefully, very respectfully, very civilly to people who were in an entirely different political space than we might be. And that's where I'm sort of saying people really listened and appreciated each other. And there were people, I remember Dick Randigan, for instance, who was wonderful at making sure the commas were in the right place. And there's a degree of work of housekeeping work that needs to happen too, of just making sure you've got the language updated and any sort of typographical errors get fixed. And we had people who had experience in City Hall and people who had been in the elected office, people who'd been in staff positions. I had the sense we really listened and respected that and saw it as a strength, that being different was valuable, not something where we were going to get adversarial with each other. I mean, I think we walked out with great respect for the fellow commissioners. And that was just embedded in the process and critically important to a good outcome.
And I am a little concerned in the current environment that there's a very strong effort to have people who all already agree with each other on the commission. And I would suggest that that's a mistake, that the disagreements that we had were very helpful.
I'm in very strong agreement with you, Pam, that I think it is the diversity of opinions, ideas, experience is a strength, not a limitation. And you'll get a better product, better charter, which is, it's a structure for government. People will be elected to inhabit the positions of it, and these are the rules of the road. It's different than sort of being advocating for an issue. Issues are part of it, but the structure is really the part that fascinated me. How we're architects of the city government, and how do you create an architecture that will enable the people who are elected to be the best people they can be on behalf of the people in the city that they represent.
And our differences helped us.
Yes.
I appreciate the reflection and the advice for incoming charter commissioners. I have yet another process question, and then I'll take us to more of the substance of your recommendations and discussion. Did you get significant public input, and how did you solicit it? And what are your overall reflections on what the public said?
We pursued that in a couple of different ways. And one, people could come and listen to the meeting, although we didn't often allow people to speak, I don't think. We had special meetings just to invite public comment.
Mhm.
And we also took public comment from people who wrote to us or in other ways. Maybe others would have a more specific memory of that.
The meetings were televised. Oh, sorry, Anna, go ahead.
That's fine. I agree with that. The public comment was received much in the way that it is in, school board or city council. And, perhaps there's a larger question of whether any elected official receives the input of the sort of full gamut of constituents that they represent in that forum in general. But we did have public hearings. I think those were often informed by the process that we had outlined for each issue.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember there being some pretty packed public comment, public hearings.
Right.
And we were doing this, it was televised, so we were on camera, and it was taped. Because I would run into people who said, I was, Saturday morning, I watched it and they had something to say. They hadn't actually ever showed up in front of us and said something, but there was that accessibility. And I think that was, and we were concerned about that, sort of trying to push out what we were doing so people were aware of it. And they might not actually show up. Sometimes I think people think that public input only happens when you show up at the meeting. And the reality is it sometimes happens at Hannaford. It happens when you're out for a walk or you're sitting on the bleachers at a sports game or something. There are lots of places that people in elected office get public input. And by really doing all of our substantive work, I mean, we had the subcommittees that worked a little bit, but the discussion, and it was a lot of discussion, happened on camera. So people were kind of watching us wrestle with those issues. And I think, wrestled with them and we were hoping they were educated by our working them over. And they had an accessibility to let us know what they were thinking.
Great. I appreciate that answer. I have two more questions for you, and then I will ask you questions from the public. The first is the one about the biggest change that you proposed. Jim Cohen expressed some desire to see more change in the way the mayor wields power and in the way the council wields power. How did you arrive at the current arrangement as far as the balance of power in city government, especially that concerns the relationship between the mayor and the city manager? I think that's a burning question in the minds of many audience members and in my mind.
The position that we created, and I'm sure the others will weigh in their own perspective, but we created as a sort of job description, which insisted that the mayor needed to serve as a person who might bring issues to the council, but had to bring the council together to have the council make a decision, which would then be what would drive forward that particular issue, whatever it was. And that the mayor was intentionally not given the power to just go out and make things happen. That the mayor's job was to create consensus on the council, or at least get enough votes on the council to be able to move forward in that direction. And so we did not, and intentionally did not, provide any administrative running of the government, telling some department what to do or anything. That definitely was not in our vision.
And just to interrupt here before, was that something that everyone agreed on at the outset, or did you arrive at that through discussions? How were people persuaded? Were some people unhappily in the corner with a different idea of what should happen, and others over here, in greater numbers, happy with what did happen? How did that process shake out?
Well, I think we had people who had worked in city government, who had been staff, and we had folks who had been elected officials who had worked collaboratively with city staff and with managers. I think that sometimes there can be a confusion between a position and a personality within a position. And I think I remember a discussion where we talked about the skills and knowledge base that's needed now to run a city. That, being in charge of public works takes a certain kind of background and skill to be that the city manager should also have the time and the freedom to be able to run the operations of the city, while the mayor kind of carried some of the political load. We were trying to create, in my recollection, sort of a place where people could collaborate in partnership and both by working together, move the city forward with the council. But I think there was respect for city staff and for their skills and expertise. And there was concern about having an elected mayor who would come in and say, have strong executive authority, who might not really know anything about how the day-to-day functions of keeping a city running, worked. And so we did, and so we went away from, I think it was Westbrook at the time, had also just had a popularly elected mayor who had much stronger powers and come in and fired a whole bunch of folks, like the police chief and the fire chief. And, you know, we didn't see that as being helpful to the running of the government, that we thought there should be some consistency and some professionalism.
Yeah, and I think we had, you know, we had 12 members of the commission, and I think we had about a third, and a third, you know, that some of us were at one end of the spectrum wanting a stronger, more executive mayor, and some of us were at the other end wanting no mayor and a strong city manager. And then we had a kind of a middle group, and we did learn through research that it wasn't uncommon for municipalities to be sort of making this kind of hybrid mayor, where some of the executive authorities were moved along that spectrum over to the mayor's side, but you retained the city manager for that kind of professional aspect that they bring to the table. But I do, you know, all of those kind of pieces of the mayor position that Jim talked about earlier, we had to put forward one package on the ballot that was like the mayor package. And there were so many pieces of that we debated along the way. And so, you know, I mean, I voted in the minority on some of those things, but then overall, when it came to putting forward the mayor, I voted for that. So I think, you know, through the process, we were able to arrive at something that was maybe not perfect for each of us individually, but acceptable to all of us collectively.
Interesting. And did it feel like a challenge to sell the revised charter to voters? Or was it smooth sailing once you put a document in front of the public?
I remember that once we decommissioned, some of us kind of transitioned right into a campaign to do just that, to kind of sell the proposals that we had just put forward. So yeah, it was a challenge. I remember going to forums and talking about this new mayor position and how it did have teeth, you know. So yeah.
And we were very concerned about ranked choice voting, because we were concerned, and people were somewhat confused. They hadn't seen it. They didn't understand how it would work. And we were trying to make sure that we did separate our recommendations on purpose. We were trying to create something and think about, okay, if this passes, but this doesn't, what will that mean? If that passes, but this doesn't, what will that mean? But I remember ranked choice voting being one where we undertook there was an education component to it after the fact, so that people would understand what they were voting on. Some other parts, were much less controversial, and probably had much less interest. What we named the school committee or the Board of Education, people weren't as excited about, or the housekeeping changes, making sure commas were in the right place. Yeah, not much debate on that. I think it really was the mayor and and ranked choice voting, which were the ones where, but we were, as a group, I think, trying to create something that we thought the majority of the city could buy into, and that would work. Might not have been our own personal version of what we might have done, but as a group, we came together, and I think we all felt we could live with what we were recommending in whatever way. And given the diversity of the folks around the dais, that's saying quite a bit.
And were voters able to vote on individual changes to the charter, or was it a take the whole thing or leave the whole thing type vote?
No, it was section by section.
Okay.
There were about at least four sections you could vote on individually.
And
I
we decided how to put them on the ballot. We could have put it
Yes.
on all at one, or we divided it up. And one thing that we actually debated pretty extensively was whether or not to include ranked choice voting and the mayor as one proposal, which we ultimately did. But there was, in the minds of those of us who were kind of like strongly pro ranked choice voting, there was a fear that if it was left off the mayor, we might not get it. And then there was a fear that if we tied it to the mayor, then it might sink the mayor. So that was an internal struggle for us, but ultimately we did decide to put that together as one package.
Interesting.
Well, I think it goes back to the belief, the value that we sort of shared, which was we wanted the mayor to have a majority, to have a mandate, to feel like
Right.
whoever was elected. And so we tied those together because we thought that was the best way to have that person in a brand new position, in essence, going into it with the feeling that the voters had their back and that they had a mandate to move ahead, the approval.
In fact, I would say one of the things that concerns me about how it all came down in the end is that it was certainly my hope, and I think several people's hope, that the election process for a popularly elected citywide mayor would force candidates to put out a vision of the future for the city, or a cause that was the most important thing to them. The single thing I'm going to fight for is to have us be the greenest city in the world, or the single thing I'm going to fight for is to do this other thing for people. And then people would be choosing based on a direction that had been clearly stated by the candidates. Well, maybe. I mean, I can't say that that's exactly how that worked out. And I think that's my only regret in this, is that there's still a very high element of a popularity contest that may or may not be attached to any specific direction.
Pam, I'm extremely glad you went there because that was going to be my next question. You have
Go for it.
the benefit of hindsight. It's been a decade and a bit. How has it worked out?
Well, I've spoken my piece. You ladies are up.
I think for me, I've really reflected a lot on, you can design to a point, but the design does not determine who occupies the position or the degree to which they follow the job description that sort of the Charter Commission had in mind. And we talked a lot about how this would work. And we were working very collaboratively. And I think we envisioned a political environment where people would work very collaboratively. But the reality is the voters elect people with personalities and backgrounds and skills and or lack of skills. They are who they are, and they may not understand or agree with the idea that we had about how the mayor should work or what the mayor should do. And so how it plays out in real time is a little different. The other thing I would say is we've had 3 people occupy that position. They're 3 very different people. And they're in the same position. So they're each giving it their own take on that. And I wonder whether it maybe takes a little longer for the community and the community is still developing its sense of what that position really is about, and that it may take time to kind of really create the lived job description as opposed to what we wrote. I don't know if changing the structure will have an impact. it could be positive, it might not be, because I'm not sure enough time has gone by to give that position sort of its sense of really becoming itself. It needs to grow and develop, I think. And the community needs to help grow and develop what they expect it to be. What does political leadership look like in Portland, and how partisan or adversarial is that? And we've certainly had an increase in a much more adversarial, ideological, you are on this side or you're on that side, in our nonpartisan public, elected public service. And there's different ways to look at being on the council or being mayor or being on the school board, about what your role is. And so I think the community and the individuals in that position are still learning and growing in it. Perhaps some structural changes might help, and they might hinder. I don't know.
I think that a charter commission is, it's created by virtue of a public vote. And so, and it's not the easiest thing to bring about, to open up the charter. So when it happens, that to me is indicative that the city is ready for some kind of change. I think that the mayor that we arrived at the time, I think that our city is very divided on the issue of the elected mayor, probably pretty close to 50-50. And I think, it's that way today, and it was that way back in 2010. I think what we ended up with in 2010 is better than what we had. But I think that this commission now has the opportunity to kind of assess the pulse of the city and figure out, do we need to go a little bit further? Do we need to go a little bit back? I think that probably, there are some things we could do to clarify the position. It's hard for a mayor to run on principles and ideas and then not really have a lot of tools to make those things happen. And what we arrived at really was a policy mayor. I think, one thing to really examine is budget authority, because the budget is the policy document. It is a policy document. And it is the thing that affects equity in our society. So, who gets the first shot at drafting that budget? I think that's an important thing to look at in the context of a mayor.
Well, we have 10 minutes left in the program, and I will ask you some questions that came from the public. I'll pick them at random. One question is, can you elaborate on how the revision to the charter in 2010 made the city inclusive? And how is the current mayor position different from assembly or council speaker?
Would you run that one by me again?
Sure. Let me ask it in two parts. The first part is, can you elaborate on how the revision to the charter in 2010 made the city inclusive or more inclusive?
I'm not sure it made it more inclusive in terms of engaging more individuals. But I do think it gives the public the chance to elect someone based on where they think the city should go, which was really our intent. Do we want the city to turn left? Do we want the city to turn right? Do we want the city to focus everything on the environment? That was our hope, that it would do that. And I still think that's a possibility. I'm not sure it's turned out that way.
Any thoughts from Lori or Anna?
I mean, when I think about inclusivity, like I sort of turn to my work on the school board, we've been really focused on equity, and we've done sort of this deep professional development on the board in terms of understanding internal bias. And so I feel like I really understand that there is a segment of our community that we never hear from that is perhaps most affected by the policy decisions that we make. And those that we do hear from tend to be the ones who have learned how to kind of navigate our political system and therefore have an advantage. So I don't think, if I'm not sure we ever made that a goal, to improve inclusivity with the charter in 2010. And I think that would be a great opportunity for the commission today. But the sort of other half of the question, I think the big thing about the elected mayor is the accountability piece. At least now we have a mayor who has an accountability to the voters. And, before it was sort of a whose turn is it now kind of thing. And all you did was kind of show up to ceremonies and, other than that, chair the city council meetings. So it is actually quite a difference, I think, between, in terms of visibility and vision, what we have today. We just, there's still a struggle, I think, in that where the authority resides.
Although I do think the current situation, the current system does provide an opportunity for a mayor to have a cause that he or she believes deeply in and take the time to try and move that cause forward. And which was not true in the old system, particularly.
I think perhaps the discussion of non-citizen voting was probably as close as that was an element of inclusivity. We were concerned about folks who lived in our city but had and were unlikely to get quickly the ability to weigh in on local concerns while they paid taxes, their children went to school, but that they could come and talk at a meeting or send information to their elected officials. They didn't actually have the vote. But that we discussed it, and it didn't reach the level where that was moved forward as a charter recommendation.
I see. Interesting.
It came to the ballot through a referendum process at the same time as the charter. And I've had some people say, but you did that. And I said, no, charter commission discussed it, but it came to the ballot through a different process because it was not a charter recommendation. It was a referendum.
Okay. I'll ask you another question from the audience. What would you have done differently about the process you used on the commission? For example, would you have brought in more experts or structured the discussion differently or had more public outreach? Or was it all perfect?
There's no perfect. I'm not sure. I think we worked really hard on the process. And so I think we were very intentional about that. That does not necessarily make it perfect.
Yeah.
And I think we worked really hard to do public outreach as well. Does that mean that everybody in the public knew what we were doing or even knew we existed? No. But it wasn't that we just met in City Hall and didn't think about people, because we knew this needed to get, if it was going to get approved, the voters couldn't just show up. at the ballot, at the polls, and sort of, we didn't want them to be uneducated in it. And we'd had a community process, which really, when I was campaigning, most of what I did was explain to people what a charter commission was. It was not so much about whether I should be on it or not. They had no idea what it was. There hadn't been one for 25 years, I think it was. It's been quite a while. So charter commission recommendations also don't show up on your ballot very often. And we were trying to make sure people knew what it was we were doing. So
Yeah, I actually think our process was pretty good because, you only have a year to do it, and you have to figure out how to get it together in that time. And when you have 12 people, all with different backgrounds, experiences, ideas, and things they want to bring to the table, and 12 months to come to a majority recommendation, you have to figure out process pretty quickly. And the process is up to the commission collectively to decide. It's not like, you get in there and somebody tells you, okay, this is how this is going to work. You have to figure that out. And I think the subcommittees making recommendations for each issue was, it turned out to be a really productive thing, because we were able to say, what do we actually need in order to vet this issue?
We have a couple of minutes, and I'm going to ask a self-interested question. There is a lot of research on the way the cities of hundreds of places around the world and in the United States work. A year, as Anna, you suggested, is a very short period of time in which to crunch all of the research, digest all of the insights by political scientists, constitutional lawyers, and other researchers. How did you decide enough research had been done on a discrete issue? And what's your advice on that point to incoming commissioners?
I'm not sure there's a simple, quick answer to that, but I do feel really strongly that gathering information is hugely important. We all walked into that room with a lot of opinions. That was not a problem in this group of people. And what was important was that we were all willing to go search out the data or have someone help us find the data. And then we could look at that data together and see if that didn't bring us to some conclusion. And I feel strongly that there were sort of two key things that helped us enormously, apart from everyone's patience with one another. But one was people's willingness to read the homework, to actually research things, get things done. We gathered information on dozens and dozens of communities our size who had different variations on mayors, and then shared all that information. So to really look for information on how things work in other places, not just say, this is my opinion, so it's going to work here. Where has it worked? Where has it not worked? So it was very good. I think people were willing to take the time to collect that information. So I recommend that things be based on data and information.
And we coupled that. I remember many times when we do sort of thumbs up, thumbs down, there was a lot of temperature taking, and the group cared about and respected each other. And we wanted everyone to feel comfortable when we took a final vote, so that it was okay to say, I'm not ready yet. I don't have enough. It could have been that everybody else thought it was, people didn't impede the group, but we really did respect the process, that some people would come to a conclusion more quickly, other people were going to need more time, and that was okay, because we wanted to get the whole group there and have the whole group feeling good about the decisions that we were making. And that respect and collegiality I think, was a critical piece of process to really getting us to the result.
Yeah, and I think it, how much is enough is really issue dependent. If some of the issues that we took up were just like foreign to most of us. And so we really had to think about who are the experts that we need to bring in to just give us a basic education on this. And then we also had to think about, what's the temperature of the commission, and, what are some people going to need versus what are others going to need. And we did have some tools that helped us with research. We had a staff person, Liz Boynton, who was tremendously helpful. She would go out and dig stuff up for us. And we also utilized Maine Municipal Association quite a bit, I think. So there were some kind of research tools at our disposal to be able to collect what we needed.
Well, Pam, Lori, Anna, thank you so much for your time. Jim, thank you in your absence. I very much appreciate it. Thank you to the Portland Public Library and League of Women Voters. I wish I could pick your brains for a lot longer, but we are out of time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to work with you all again. It's been a treat.
Yes.
Thank you so much for attending tonight's program, and thank you to the panelists. Please stay tuned to the Portland Public website and the League of Women Voters website for more information as the commission convenes in June. Throughout the year, we'll have programming and more resources available. And this discussion itself will be available on the Portland Public website, hopefully by this Friday. So please check back. Thanks again. Have a great night.